So the video that I'm making today is another video that I've wanted to make for a while. This one is a bit more vulnerable for me, I think, but I am putting this together because I meet so many girls and so many people nowadays that remind me of my younger self and just myself in general. When I was younger, I felt a little bit more like the abnormal one for lots of different reasons, but also because I didn't necessarily see people exhibiting the same addict-like behaviors that I did, or the same almost like reactions to trauma that I did or that I exhibited. But people more and more nowadays remind me of myself in that aspect, and it's a little like, it's just sad to see. It's sad to see that people are potentially walking around with more trauma, that people are getting addicted to more things aside from just drugs, just like your phone, addicted to stimulation, but so because of that, this idea kind of weighs on my heart a lot, and I've wanted to make this video, but I've wanted to make sure that I do it right and say it right, because there's so many aspects to it once again. So in lieu of that, this video is really made for people who I would almost call my brothers and sisters in trauma. I call them my spirit sisters because it's usually more so women that I meet that remind me of myself, but I'm very aware that there are men out there also going through things like this, and that it's just as possible for a woman to be extremely abusive and manipulative. But yeah, so, this video is kind of made for my spirit sisters and my spirit brothers, people who, when I meet people like you out in public, I usually feel a kinship with you, an automatic kinship with you, and an automatic familiarity with you in a lot of ways because, unfortunately, these types of trauma really make us very similar in the types of mistakes that we make, in the ways that we're very caring and very giving and almost neglectful of ourselves, the coping mechanisms that we develop. It just makes you guys seem very similar to me, and in some ways that's really nice because then I don't feel as alone. In some ways that's really nice because I look at you guys that I meet out in the real world and it helps me understand myself better. But in some ways it's also very sad to see that, through the similarities between all of us, it really also shows me how much of my own personality is a result of trauma. And that can be discouraging sometimes as well. But either way, the video that I'm making today, this is made for a friend, and I want to talk in this like I would talk to one of my friends, which I know I normally do anyway in my videos, but this video I think will be a little bit more vulnerable for me, but it's just something that I think might be helpful to talk about. And so I'm just going to kind of jump right into it. I have obviously shared in my other videos that I was groomed by a predator when I was young, and that had a huge impact on my personality. I actually didn't even understand up until a few years ago how much this had an impact on how I viewed myself, how I related to the people around me, the ways that I treated the people around me, the ways that I treated myself, the way I expected to be treated. I mean, it affected everything, but I didn't realize this. And so there was this huge pattern in my life after I got away from my initial predator, the pedophile who groomed me from 13 to 16. After I got away from him, I continued to be involved with very abusive, charismatic people. And I didn't really understand why that was a pattern in my life. I blamed myself a lot of times for that. There was a lot in that for me. But either way, it felt like I kept making the same mistake over and over again in the partner that I would choose. And it was like a lesson that I couldn't seem to learn, a lesson that it felt like my brain couldn't learn. There was a deep discouragement inside of me because I continued to somehow end up with the same type of man over and over and over again. And I really could not figure out why. I worked really hard to try to change that pattern, and it seemed like no matter what I tried, the pattern didn't change, and that was very confusing for me. And I think sometimes, when I talk about this or when we tell our stories, we tell it, hindsight's always 20/20. So when we tell our stories, we tell the story with the knowledge that we have now, and it's hard to convey the story from the perspective of what we were like back then when we didn't have that knowledge. So the lesson is always very obvious when it's coming from the storyteller, because the storyteller already knows the lesson, but the person in the story didn't at the time. So, to just sort of expand on how being groomed by a predator affected me. I know I've talked about that in other videos, but I don't think I've really laid out before what that indoctrination really looked like and how it left me indoctrinated. I had this whole idea of what I thought a cool girl was. And this is where I see a lot of other people being very similar to me with this idea, a lot of other women. And I was held hostage by this idea. I really was. I longed to be the cool girl. It consumed me. It was everything. The most important part of my identity was trying to be the cool girl. And for me, the cool girl was someone who wasn't very emotional, didn't really have any needs, was able to be super sexually available to the man, do whatever it was that the man desired sexually, and provide that for him so that he would stay and be pleased, to be the best sexual experience that he'd ever had. I thought the cool girl was someone who was wild and adventurous and lacked boundaries. The cool girl was measured, honestly, this wasn't anything that I explicitly, logically laid out. You know what I'm saying? It was just this idea that I learned through Predator and through porn and through, honestly, a lot of the movies that I ingested at the time. But I thought that that was what I needed to be to really, truly make a man happy, was this person who really, in all actuality, was kind of lost, because the only way to know if I was the cool girl, that standard was measured by whoever was currently in the room, right? And so talk about an exhausting and ever fluctuating standard, always fluctuating. I mean, if it's measured by whoever's currently in the room, and everyone lives by different standards and every person has different expectations. I heard a quote once, and I know I'm going to botch it, but it essentially says that you can't, if you're getting along with everyone, you're probably compromising some part of yourself, because we are all so vastly different that at some point you should be running into people that you don't get along with if you're being authentically yourself all the time. And so that is what was happening with me, is I was so desperate to get along with everyone in the room, whoever was there, that I would compromise parts of myself to try to gain their approval, because I had no idea what standard to hold myself to on my own. I needed other people to tell me that. And I couldn't see how this wasn't working out for me. I couldn't see it. It wasn't until the most recent, extremely exploitive incident that I had that I sort of reached my bottom, in essence, and I saw how this didn't work for me. Aside from this idea of a cool girl, the other thing that really held me hostage was this deep fear that I had. At some point I'm going to do a video on borderline personality. I know there's lots of videos out there. It's not like I'm maybe going to say anything super new or mind-blowing. But there are traits of borderline personality that do run in my family. And I know that fear of abandonment is a huge aspect of that. And I had that. I was so terrified of a man not choosing me, of a man deciding that I was not the one for him, and there was some other woman who pleased him more, who he found more worthy of his love. That idea terrified me. It's hard to describe how much it terrified me, because I felt it on almost an intrinsic level. It would make my body shut down and my mind shut down. It would make me go completely numb. I mean, it was an all-consuming experience, this fear that I had of a man not choosing me and not wanting me, whichever man I currently was interested in. And not just that, but when I met a man, I immediately gave him all credibility, meaning that if I had only known him a day, if I had only known him a week, I valued his opinion of me so much. And so if there was a man who flirted with me, let's say at work, right? And I would invest all of my worth into that. So at that point, here's a man, he's flirted with me in my first day of working somewhere, or first few days of working somewhere. And then, I'd know nothing about this person, and I immediately assume that their opinion matters. And if they don't want me, that must mean something is wrong with me. This total stranger who could be a total skis bag, I've now invested all of my self-worth in my mind. And so if that man, after 2 or 3 days of flirting with me, maybe moves on to flirt with someone else, I essentially was devastated. I was devastated by this. And I can't even describe what it would do to my body and my mind. It's just hard to describe. But I mean, it really does remind me of borderline personality a little bit. The level of discouragement that I would feel, the level of fear that I would feel at being abandoned by this person is what it felt like. When really we weren't even dating and nothing had even come of our relationship, but that's how much I would invest myself and how quickly. Because again, I had no other way to measure my worth or measure my self-esteem outside of this man. So that was another component to it. So we had me being held hostage by the idea of the cool girl. We had me being held hostage by my fear of abandonment and my self-worth being tied to any man in the room and letting him decide what that was for me. And then I think the other thing that really held me hostage was not knowing how to trust my instinct. Looking back now, I can see that my instinct was speaking to me so much throughout my life. But in these moments with these men, I assumed that I was crazy. I assumed that I had trauma, unresolved trauma from, my initial experience with my predator. And this is what these men encouraged me to believe as well. So it was both of us together, living in this narrative of Ehren is crazy because she was groomed and raped by a pedophile. So clearly she has no way of accurately measuring what is going on around her anymore. If she gets upset, it must have to do with her trauma. If she gets suspicious, it must have to do with her trauma. If she gets jealous in any kind of way, that must have to do with her trauma. If she has standards that I don't want to be held to, that must have to do with her trauma. I mean, it felt like everything came back to my trauma, and that made sense to me. I was like, you know what? It must come back to my trauma. And so that was the third thing that really held me hostage, was not valuing any emotion that I had, assuming that every single emotion that I had outside of joy and happiness, A, must be a burden, and B, must be completely irrational. And what I've realized now, later, is it doesn't make any sense when you actually think about it, that trauma and a very explicit one-on-one experience with a predator, where I got to know that predator very well, and I, more than anyone else, knew what my trauma felt like, knew what my grooming felt like, knew what the manipulation that was done to me felt like. No one knew that more accurately than me, because I was the one who was there for it. And so if I were to measure who would be, if two people are standing next to each other, one with trauma experience, with a firsthand experience of manipulation, a firsthand experience of grooming, a firsthand experience with a predator, if that person is standing in the room next to a person who has no experience in trauma, no firsthand experience in grooming or manipulation or a predator, and you're going to ask me which person probably is more credible at detecting a predator again, who is more credible and who probably will be better at detecting grooming, who will probably be better at detecting manipulation, which of those two people? And the answer is obvious when you actually think about it, the person with the trauma, the person with that firsthand experience. But that was not a thought that ever occurred to me. And that was not a thought that was ever encouraged by any of these other predatory men that I dated. And I don't want to water them down to something like that, because I don't think people are black and white. But that was definitely an aspect of them, because they always encouraged the other narrative, which was that I wasn't more of an expert in detecting dangerous things. I was less of an expert. I was an irrational, handicapped person who essentially had no barometer inside of herself for detecting dangerous things, and was just this irrational person that had to be handled and tolerated. That's what my trauma left me with, according to these men that I dated. Not, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to keep rehashing it, but that's just such an important thing that I realized today that I don't necessarily hear being discussed in other videos, which is totally fine. But that realization that I personally feel like has come from God really has liberated me from a lot of the self-doubt that I've had. The other thing I realize about myself now that I didn't realize back then, because I couldn't figure out why I was constantly, the cognitive dissonance, which, if you don't know what that means, that's where you essentially believe two opposing things at the same exact time. So a lot of times with people who are in the midst of abuse, they realize that their abuser is an abuser, but at the same time, they're incredibly in love with them and they don't want that to be true. And so they believe that their abuser is and is not an abuser at the same exact time. And that is what cognitive dissonance is. And, with the cognitive dissonance, I didn't realize why I was always like that in my abusive relationships, and not just with recognizing the abuse, but also in the sense that I was unhappy in the relationship. And not even yes, it's in regards to abuse, but what I'm getting at is I didn't know that what I was looking for the whole time was someone who was safe to love, someone who felt safe to fall in love with. And so I would chase these men who were reckless and felt unattainable, or who felt like, they weren't 100% satisfied with me. And I chased that kind of person thinking that that's what I was looking for. And every single time it made me miserable, obviously. But I couldn't understand why, right? And again, it probably sounds obvious, like, well, yeah, everybody would be miserable with that. But when you don't know what you're looking for, you don't understand why you're miserable with something. Does that make sense? It's like if you don't have standards and boundaries and a list of something that you're looking for, you really have no way to measure why you're unhappy with something, because to hold it against. You know what I'm saying? And so that was another thing that I had to develop later, was an actual list of something that I was looking for in a person, in a man, in a partner, in a spouse. What was I looking for? Because without that list, I was in this fog where I had no idea why I should be unhappy or not unhappy with something. Like if I was in an argument with the person that I was dating, and they were trying to tell me, no, you should be okay with this thing over here, I really had never sat down and thought out, should I be okay with that thing? Should I not be okay with that thing? What am I looking for? They know what they're looking for, and they're telling me that I should get on the same page with them because this is what they're looking for over here. But then I didn't have any list to compare that to. I didn't have any standards, And so all I'm saying is when I actually sat down and wrote out my list, finally, of the things that I was looking for, and I read that out to myself and really examined it, what I was looking for the whole time was someone who was safe to fall in love with, who felt safe to give my heart to. But I chased the complete opposite for so long because I had no way of measuring what was a safe person. The connection I didn't really make in this that I just wanted to add in really quick is that how that relates to cognitive dissonance is that the reason I was chasing reckless things that made me unhappy was because of my indoctrination from my original predator. And my spirit, or my soul man, or whatever you want to call it, my original person inside, remembered that what it actually wanted, what we're born with the desire for, I believe, is someone safe to love. But my indoctrination taught me to chase unsafe, reckless things because that's what I was groomed to desire. That's what I was groomed to think love looked like. And so I existed in a cognitive dissonance in many relationships where I thought that I wanted one thing, but my spirit was constantly trying to remind me of the original true thing that it was that I was actually yearning for, which was someone safe to love. And that's the other thing that has been a huge epiphany for me since my last very exploitive experience, was realizing that the reason it was so easy for that person to exploit me was because I had no idea what I was looking for at all. I had no list. And that made me reassess many of my other predatory experiences and see that that was a huge pattern in all of them, was that I had no metaphorical fence built for where my tolerance of certain behavior stopped. And so I don't know if that visual works for that, but in essence, if you have not stated for yourself, here are the things I will tolerate and here are the things I will not tolerate. And if these things are on my I will not tolerate list, it's because I will absolutely never tolerate them. I don't put maybe will tolerates on my do not tolerate list. If it's on there, it's because that is the line that I have drawn, that is the fence that I have built, the boundary that I have built, and those are the types of behaviors that will never come into my yard. Does that make sense? And I didn't have that before, and I have that now. And that's been, I think, what the craziest part of changing as much as I have into someone who respects my own needs and respects my own boundaries now that I have them, is, I went from this person who was so desperate to please everyone in the room, was so afraid of being rejected by any man ever, didn't know how to argue for my own desires because I didn't know if the desires I had were correct or not. I went from that type of person associating all my value with my body and how much sex I could give a man. And if he complained that I wasn't having sex with him enough, I assumed that he was right and that I was a bad girlfriend. And in some ways, he maybe had a justification for cheating on me. I went from all of that to a person now where I can see so clearly how all of those things are absolutely ridiculous to me. And I now have a list of things that I will tolerate and will not tolerate. I now have a standard that I hold myself and other men to. And I've never been called a bitch so much in my life. And these aren't even men that I'm dating. These are men that just want to date me that I'm saying no to. And I think it's so strange but eye-opening that the more that I hold to my I will not tolerate boundaries, the more that I see that truly manipulative people who say that they care about me but then actually don't, those types of people, when they run into my fence and they see that there's no breaking point for it, that I'm not going to make an exception for whatever, they throw versions of temper tantrums. And that's putting it nicely, to be honest, because sometimes the things that are said to me are truly hurtful by a person that I'm not even necessarily involved with yet because they're that mad that I have standards. And I think it's been really important for me to see that. It reaffirms for me why I built the fence. Because if you have a fence and it's built there to keep you safe, and then you have someone on the outside of the fence asking to be let into your yard, and they seem really nice, right? So somebody's standing outside the fence, and you come up to the fence gate door, and you know, this is like what dating, I guess, would look like, but they're standing there and they're like, hey, can you let me into your yard? You know, they say a bunch of really nice crap. They pretend that they're going to be nice to me. They list off all these ways that they're going to be like really respectful to me, treat me right. They're not like the last few guys that I dated. They tell me about how they're different, etc., etc. And they go through this whole like spiel with their words, right? And then we come to the first thing that I list, where they exhibit some behavior, they say something that makes me go, you know, maybe I might let you into my yard, but like not just yet. And they like freak out. And sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, but they show their first face, their first side of themselves that's not nice. And that makes me feel cautious, right? And so I go, okay, yeah, we might have to wait a little longer now for you to be let into my yard, you know, after I just saw that really weird, psycho, whatever mean thing it is that you said that's now like a red flag. And being let into my yard, sometimes that's sex. Sometimes that's just someone asking that I call them my boyfriend. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not there. I'm not ready yet because I've only known you like a week and a half. Sometimes it's some kind of like crazy life decision where I'm like, absolutely not. I definitely have not known you long enough. It depends on what the thing is, but either way, it's someone attempting to get into my heart, get into a more intimate part of my life. There's lots of different things that might be. But like I've talked about in other videos before, you learn who people are when you say no. And you really have to understand that there are kind people out there who are not going to make you feel bad about yourself when you say no to something. There's a difference between someone saying, you know, the boundary that you set or the thing that you're saying no to makes me sad. Here's why. Let's talk about it. That is a completely different approach than to you saying no to something and someone trying to make you feel like there's something wrong with you, like you have less value because of that. So really intrinsically attacking your character when you say no to something. That is a completely different thing. I've said this in other videos and I'm just going to keep harping on it. You have to pay attention to how people react to your no. You just have to, because these types of people that I have dedicated all of my mini videos to will always pretend and act like they are okay with your no. They might even believe in their mind that they are okay with your no. They really might. The reason you know that they are not okay with your no is because they bring it up again, period. You have to, their words, people's words are easy. Words are easy. We can all sit there all day long and pimp a speech about ourselves and how great we are and how kind we are and how understanding we are and we're the best and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, action speaks so much louder. I am so tired of my trauma being used as the scapegoat in any relationship. I'm so tired of opening up to men about my past and then pretending to be really sympathetic and really understanding. And then within a few days to a few weeks, my past is being used against me as a reason why I should not have any credibility for how I'm behaving or how I'm feeling. I am so tired of that dynamic. I am so done with that dynamic. I'm over it. I've outgrown it, and I'm not doing it anymore. You know, it's really interesting because I heard a guy talk about, he was educating policemen on how to recognize prostitutes to basically rescue them from sex trafficking. And in sex trafficking, they call the whole entire experience of prostitution the game. And so one thing that police officers or people can ask someone who might not want to admit that they're a prostitute is, how long have you been in the game? To kind of show them that you do understand that world and you know what that world's about by using their own language with them. So they call this whole experience the game. And before I even knew that, you know, as I've been processing this whole way that I used to date men, I've called it the game. And watching it all now in front of me, not just with myself, I watch other people, you know, out in the world, especially at my job in different places. I watch people flirt. I watch people have a lack of boundaries. I watch just kind of how people approach each other romantically. And it feels like a game. It feels like a game more than dating nowadays. And that is the biggest thing that I do feel like I've recognized, is that right there. And just becoming so incredibly unimpressed with that. And I understand that, you know, once again, these standards that I hold myself to, and these things that I've realized, and these ways that I perceive the men around me might keep me single for longer than I would hope or want. But at the same time, if it's a game and I'm not looking for a game, why would I play it? There's no point. It's a complete waste of time. And I value my heart too much nowadays to treat it like a tennis ball that's just being bounced around between a bunch of rackets. You know, it's my heart, especially after everything that I've put it through, is incredibly fragile, and I want to treat it with the tenderness that it deserves and the fragility that it deserves. And I'm looking for a person who wants to handle my heart the same exact way. And you can't determine that or figure that out in the course of a few days of talking to someone. It takes time. And if people don't want to take the time to get to know me on that level, and if they want to make me feel like there's something wrong with me, or like somehow they want to take my boundary personally, you know, more than anything, you know, I think that an argument can be made, okay, well then we're just not right for each other. If someone is over here, right, wrong, or otherwise, and is looking for someone to give them their body and their heart within a very short period of time, and I'm over here as a very kind of fragile person with all this trauma that needs to take things really slow, right, wrong, or otherwise, we're not right for each other. That's just not a good fit. And, you know, more than anything, I think that's one of the best arguments that can be made in a situation like this, where maybe somebody isn't enjoying your boundaries and is trying to act like, you know, that's a personal attack on them in some kind of way, is just to simply state that, like, look, it's okay. Not everyone is for everyone. And you are more than welcome to go on your way and try and find someone else who's more readily available, because I'm over here waiting and playing the waiting game. And a lot of times with someone who's trying to gaslight me, that just really pulls the rug out from underneath them, and with the tactic that they're trying to use. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get me emotionally invested in this idea that they are presenting to me of why my boundary is wrong, why my fence should be broken down and done away with, because they don't like my fence and they want the fence to be gone. And instead of getting emotionally invested like they want me to in that argument, I simply remove the ego from it and say, you know what, that's okay. Maybe you should go over there and look for someone with a shorter fence or no fence, you know, because I'm not interested in getting rid of mine, and you clearly don't like my fence, and the fence isn't going anywhere. But you have to have a set of boundaries to deal with, because if you have no fence whatsoever, pretty much everybody's going to be getting in your yard with no difficulties. And the fence really shows you, I think the fence is a good way of assessing people's character. I just do. And even if it's not assessing their character, it's a good way of measuring if people are looking for the same thing as you. And I'm pretty sure we all want someone who's looking for the same thing as us. Unless you don't know what you're looking for, and you don't know that you're looking for a person who's looking for the same thing as you. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm putting down? I just think it's been significant for me to realize that one of the biggest reasons why I was exploited so easily again and again and again, one reason why I was gaslit so repeatedly in relationship after relationship, one reason why I was manipulated over and over again, and my self-esteem was constantly fucked with by all of these different men, is because I didn't know what I was looking for. And one of the biggest similarities that I see between my old self and people that I run into today, specifically women, is that they don't know what they're looking for. You know, sometimes I even ask them, I'm like, what are you looking for in a man? And the things that they list don't really oftentimes have to do with the way that the man treats them in terms of respect. I don't hear much about that being a standard. And even with the standards that I do hear women list off, they seem like standards that they would be willing to change or compromise if the man was unhappy with them. And so those aren't really standards, and those aren't really boundaries, and those aren't really things that, you know, you're willing to hold firm to no matter what. And if you don't have things that you're determined to hold on to, things that you expect for yourself, no matter what, that's like the perfect scenario for a manipulator. They long for things like that. I mean, if you want to talk about the perfect setup, personality-wise, for a predator, what they're looking for personality-wise, they're looking for someone like that, someone who's lost, someone who it would be fairly easy for you to convince them, hey, your fence needs to come down, there's something wrong with it. Hey, your fence, cool people don't have fences like that. And, you know, if you're willing to believe any of those narratives for things that are really important for you, if you're willing to give up on those standards for things that are really important for you, you're compromising. And that is just the perfect breeding ground for manipulation to occur. And so for me, one of the most beneficial things that I've done is write out that list of expectations that I have. And it's really shown me a lot, just a lot. It's just been so eye-opening to have boundaries, stick to them, assert them correctly, and to watch how men react to that. Watch how men will sit there and call themselves a good person, tell me that they're so sorry for all my past trauma, and then act exactly like the men that tried to gaslight me and manipulate me. Act exactly like them, because words are easy. Actions are hard, and actions are what tell the truth. And I'm just going to keep hammering it in. It's just a question you should ask yourself. If you have something that you so deeply desire to experience in a relationship, if there is something that is very important to you personally, a quality that you yearn for and long for, and that is important for you to have in a relationship, if you have that and you're holding it there, right? You have that thing. Do you want to date someone who doesn't think that the thing you've considered precious and important, they don't consider it precious and important? And nobody's really, I don't hear anybody assessing for these things when they're dating nowadays. It's like everybody's just banging each other and then hoping it works out later. And we're all walking around with broken hearts. And I think that cycle needs to stop, and it can be stopped if we all start doing things like this more. As always, thanks for watching. I have a mosquito bite on my forehead in case you noticed it. That's what it is. It's not acne, but even if it was acne, who cares? Anyway, thanks for watching, and feel free to leave a comment down below. I always love reading your guys' comments, and God bless.